Hey, crafties, welcome to another episode of the Arena Craft Podcast, a show focused exclusively on Magic the Gathering Arena. My name is Arjuna, I'm one of your hosts. Regular co-host CovertGoBlue continues his hiatus. He's laying low, getting his ninjutsu skills up and prepared for the next set release. But in the meantime, I am happy to have another special guest on the show. And this is somebody who I've been following for years now on Twitter. And I feel like unless you've been like living under a rock or something, if you've gotten anywhere near Magic Twitter, you probably know this person. So anyway, I'm very excited to welcome to Arena Craft Podcast, the man, the myth, the legend, the enigma, Robert Taylor, Fireshoes. How you doing today, Robert?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you here. We're also joined by a quiet third co-host in the background there. Can you tell us a little bit about your feline co-host?
Well, that's Taz back there.
Taz. Very nice.
Yeah. He's one of 4 cats I have in the house. So we'll probably meet some other ones at some point.
Nice. Yeah, maybe we'll get a little more input on the episode. Yeah, well, it's always good to have another perspective, right? So there you go. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, Robert. I've been particularly excited to have you on the show, and the reason why is that I've pretty much only ever known you by one profile pic, right? And then just like a massive stream of deck lists and like the occasional pithy opinion. But I just feel like I myself, and I imagine a number of other people in the Magic community, have just been like super curious about who you are and what you're like. So, I think like part of what I want to do in this show is just to try to help the Magic community to get to know you a little bit better. So I appreciate you making yourself available for that.
Yeah, no problem. It's kind of funny. There's like 2 different personalities out there, or people that know me or don't know me. Because on Twitter, I post the deck lists or retweet them, and people don't know me from events. I'm not a pro Magic player or anything like that. So they see me around a lot on there, but they don't know me personally. But I live in Iowa, and the competitive players around Iowa see me at every event. I'm a judge, so I'm either playing or judging, and they see me all the time. So
Nice.
It's like the people that know me well from these events are the people that wouldn't recognize me if I were in the same room.
That's awesome. Well, hopefully by the end of this episode, everyone will have a bit of a better idea about who you are and what you do. So I wanted to start out, first of all, by just asking you about your history with the game. It seems like you're a pretty entrenched Magic player. So when did you start and what happened from there?
I started during Innistrad, so it was 2011. And I kind of have a weird on-ramp to Magic compared to most people. I started with Duels of the Planeswalker on Xbox.
Nice. Oh, man, I wish CGB was here. He'd be all over it with you.
Yeah. My roommate at the time was playing it, and I'm like, well, that looks really cool. And he's like, yeah, you should try it. He had played back in the 90s or whatever, And so they had a download sale for it, and he picked it up, and I started trying. And before long, I went and got an intro pack, which they don't do anymore, but it's like the new decks for new players with a couple boosters in it. And the rest is history from there. Just got into it big time.
That's awesome. And so when did you go from being just like someone playing Magic on your Xbox or like throwing around a few packs? When did you go from that to being Oh, okay. Like I'm actually really committed to this game and I want to get more serious and competitive.
Well, let's see. I played mostly at home, as a lot of people do, um, for at least several months. Just building decks with whatever cards you have. Uh, I I know at some point I had a 250 card deck with
Okay.
a bunch of blue cards. It was some weird deck that you would clone. What is it? Mirror Mad Phantasm. I don't know. It's basically you milled out your deck and win that way somehow,
Okay.
even though
It's
it's a
some
huge deck.
some combo before my time.
Yeah, exactly. But eventually, I got into drafting. So I went to my LGS and drafted a lot. I didn't play constructed at a store for at least another year. I
Okay.
would just head F and M for drafts. And as I built up my collection, then I could start playing standard. So eventually I started playing some standard and continued to build up the collection. So it probably was 2 to 3 years before I ever did any competitive events. Um, Another roommate got me to go to a PTQ. Uh, I hadn't even watched Pro Tour stuff at that point.
Okay.
So, I'm sure I had a terrible deck or whatever, but the competitive scene in Iowa is pretty impressive. Even though, it's a really rural area, everyone from the whole state goes to basically all of the different events, it seems like. So, and this was, when there would be like one PTQ in a region per month. So people would come from Wisconsin and Minnesota. So there'd be, a couple hundred people at these events. So it was a really big spectacle. And so I kind of really fed off of that excitement, it seemed like.
Man, yeah. I mean, I almost feel like when you have maybe like a, what shall I say? Just like when you're not in a huge city like New York or something like that, I almost imagine that it might make your community more tight knit, right? Because it's like when everyone's coming together, it's just like, oh my God, this is so exciting, right? This is like the one chance we get to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of my joke about it is I'll see these people every week, especially when they're doing the PPTQs, each store. I'd see people at every one of them. So I really wouldn't know which store was their home store. Like, where are you from? Because I see you every week anyway.
Yeah, it's true. It's a nomadic, nomadic bunch, huh? So,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
when did you decide to become a judge?
It was during the PPTQs because they did seasons. So, like, for 3 months, you'd qualify for this particular regional pro tour qualifier. But once you had won a PPTQ, you couldn't play anymore.
Right.
So I won one, and that put me unable to play for the next, few weeks or whatever it was. So I was like, well, I might as well become a judge. At that point, I was pretty into the competitive scene by the time PPTQs came around. So we had a Facebook group, which is called the Midwest Tournament Updater. And people got used to me posting deck lists from these paper events. So they were like, well, how are we going to get these deck lists if you're not at the events playing? Well, I became a judge, so I would be at the event anyway.
So that's when you started to be on the insider track, huh?
That's right. It's kind of strange that it started with paper deck lists more than the online ones, which people expect and are used to now. So it was pretty cool because there wasn't as much information about things back then. It's crazy how much it's changed. But when you could go and see what everyone was playing at a tournament, because I wouldn't just do the top 8 deck list. I would post the whole metagame, like what everyone was playing overall.
And so remind me, you were doing this in Facebook groups, and were you doing it on Twitter at this point?
No, I've had Twitter for a long time, but the deck lists for that were mostly just on Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Facebook group, it started, just there's a couple dozen people in it, but when PPTQ started, people didn't know where they were at. You had to go onto some Wizards website, and if you ever try to navigate a Wizards website to try to find some information, it's kind of tough sometimes. So at some point, I had gone through and I'm like, okay, here's all of these PPTQs on the schedule for Iowa and Minnesota and Illinois, and posted that at the top of the Facebook group, and people were like, "Oh, that's really helpful," And so it started growing and growing, and pretty soon we had thousands of people in there seeing where they could go for their weekly events. So it was pretty cool.
So that sounds like maybe the place where you really started to develop your like online persona in the community, or where you started to really like make a big contribution.
Exactly. So I would post, I would make a weekly post, like, here's all the events this week. If we had the top 8 deck lists, I could include a link to those so people could go check it out, do some net decking,
So when did it start to really take off on Facebook?
It's been probably about 7 years now that this Facebook group started. And that was one of those things that just continued to grow. We had some partnerships like Pastimes. They would promote an upcoming Grand Prix in the Facebook group, and we would do a drawing, and someone would win a free entry to the Grand Prix.
Nice.
And so that helped bring in more people. And I still work with Pastimes too. At the not this last year, but the previous couple of Gen Cons, I've gone and done social media coverage for them.
Oh, that's rad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then what was the point at which like Twitter started to become a thing that was really happening for you?
I think with the Twitter, it started. It must have been at the beginning of the pandemic.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. It must have been before that though. The part that really took off for it was the first Magic Fest online, if I remember right, because CFB had put on the event and people couldn't find the deck list for it at all.
Okay.
And so I would, yeah, it was on some weird website, and very hidden. But I knew where it was at. I'm like, okay, here's the deck list. These are the people that went 4-0 or 5, whatever you had to go. And so I just started doing that for each event. And then it was kind of weird, but people started tagging me on their ladder ranking or whatever it might have been. And
okay, so that happened organically, like people just like making Mythic and tagging you and stuff, like
right.
Okay.
Yeah, because like Arena deck lists was already around, and they would post people's Mythic deck lists.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had posted these top 8 deck lists from Magic Fest online or whatever, and other people they're like, here, post my deck list too. So, and then just got going more and more and more to the point now where it's seems like dozens of deck lists per day.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I've got anything hot, I definitely tag you in there for sure, and I'm always appreciative of the retweets. So, Just and do you now retweet like just about all of the tags that you get, or are you somewhat selective about what you retweet?
I do most of them. That I don't want to be the go live tweet every day for a person.
Okay. Yeah.
Or here's my YouTube video of the day. If it's got good results, that helps, But I don't necessarily want to post your 3-2 deck list or whatever. I do want something with some actual results to it.
All right. So you heard the man. That's how you get to appear on the coveted halls of Robert Taylor's tweets.
Yeah, and you've got to have a picture of the deck. Come on.
Yeah. Okay. Totally agree. And I'll throw in my 2 cents, crafties. Like, throw in an actual link to an actual deck list that's hosted somewhere, because man, recreating those from the pictures can be surprisingly frustrating.
Yeah, it does take some time. I use MTG Goldfish a lot. It seems like people go there, check out deck lists anyway. So if you've got an account, you can just click, decks, create a deck, and copy from Arena, paste it there, and you're done.
Yep. Another thing I like is the untap.gg link. First of all, because we're sponsored with them, so go check out untap.gg. Yep, friend of the podcast. If you sign up for their free service using our link, we get a small donation, so that's nice. But also because they actually have your tracking of your progress right there, so that's a really cool way to both get the deck list and see how it's been performing, and actually see some of the revisions. If you've made any changes over time, they get tracked there as well. So I think that's a really cool thing to do.
I like to go on Untapped, especially for best of 3 matches, because you can see how you've been sideboarding. Because inevitably someone's going to ask you for that sideboard guide.
Yeah.
So you can go back and check. Okay, so this is what I'm actually doing against mono red or whatever.
That's awesome. That's actually a feature I haven't really paid much attention to. I would say it's probably 50-50 best of 1 and best of 3 that I'm playing. But for some reason, I never tend to go back and look at that. So it's actually really cool to know about.
Yeah. When I was playing more paper events, I definitely played a lot more best of 3. It really makes a difference being able to sideboard.
Oh, yeah.
Best of 1 tends to push decks towards the extreme of either, hardcore control or very all-in aggro. And with best of 3, you tend to get a little bit more of the mid-range options, which makes a big difference in gameplay.
Yeah. I have also just found, for whatever amount of tinfoil hat I might wear, I have found that both my matchups and just the way that the games draw and play out feel kind of more organic and closer to the Magic that I know and think of than best of 1 does.
Yeah, you mean you don't like to switch decks and immediately have it pair you into your worst matchup every time?
Not my favorite thing to have happen. Yeah, it's either your worst matchup or just mirrors all the way down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah. So speaking of Arena, what percentage of your play these days would you say happens on Arena?
It's pretty close to 100%. I mean, at least for online play. I played a little bit of Magic online during the PAX Unplugged event, which was a cool event that got me to fire it up. They had a deal where you could 3-0 a preliminary, and if you did that, you got to play in a New Year's Day Modern Horizons 2 sealed event.
Oh, sweet.
And the winner got 4 of every modern legal card on Magic Online.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was an insane prize. People that regularly play Magic Online are like, this is possibly the highest EV tournament out there.
Oh, yeah.
4 of every modern legal card on Magic Online worked out to over $9,000.
Yeah.
for first.
Yeah. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Magic Online's economic model, you can sell your cards for tickets, and you can actually sell those tickets for real cash. So that's that's incredibly generous. Wow.
Yeah. So everyone in the top 8 of that event got at least a set of every modern card, which was very cool. And then my friend got 9th place, Henry. He got 9th place, and that was good for 12 pack.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's the standard distribution, right? That's how it goes.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was a little bit of Moto I played recently, but yeah, mostly it's just Arena. I do go up to my LGS usually once or twice a week to do some paper drafting. I don't play too much paper constructed right now, but once tournaments come back, I'll play some at that point. Although the tournaments that we have had, I've been judging at more anyway. So
right. And so when you are playing on Arena, like, you were telling me you've played some limited, you're enjoying the decathlon. So clearly you're a cross format enjoyer. Are there any formats that you find that you tend to play more than the others?
I go in spurts usually, but I dabble around a lot in limited. And then for constructed, I mostly play historic. Standard is not interesting to me usually, when there's only 2 or maybe 3 decks that are good. I don't know. It's just not that fun. But when you get into historic, it's a much bigger card pool. So you have a lot of different options for decks. I'm not normally the tier 1 deck guy. I prefer to play a brew, or at least something interesting, not the same old. If you've ever listened to the Faithless Brewing podcast, they talk about being a spike rogue. And that's what I am. I do want to win, but I kind of want to do it on my own terms, right?
I like that designation. I actually think that describes both myself and CovertGoBlue as well.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Competitive rogue brewers, or even maybe competitive jank brewers, right? Like just trying to get more mileage out of those cards that don't see as much play.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. So with all of this, I guess we get around to the first truly arena craft question of the night, and that is like, how are you feeling about alchemy?
I think alchemy is a great idea. It hasn't quite hit right yet. It's kind of funny when they introduced it. I dug up a tweet from 9 months or a year ago that said, "Boy, I'd love to have a special league of Standard where they would just make changes weekly to the ban list." Was what I was thinking. Move a card in, move a card out, just to keep it more exciting. It's sort of an artificial rotation in a way. Now, I hadn't considered, rebalancing at that time. And I definitely hadn't considered all new digital only cards. That wasn't on my radar. So when they announced it, I'm like, hey, this is going to be cool. This is a format. If they're making frequent changes, it's just going to be a lot of fun. So we'll see how it turns out, because it's probably going to be 7 weeks before we get our first change of the format.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's a funny time for you to be bringing that back up, right? Since they just announced, for any of you listening who haven't heard about it, Wizards just announced that they're not going to make any changes to the alchemy format until there's an arena open coming up. There's another what's the other tournament that's happening?
There's the Mythic Qualifier.
That's right. Yep. So, it's going to be basically forever until we get to see the next changes. And I'm intuiting, based on the context cues, that you're not a fan of that decision.
No, I mean, again, it kind of goes down to like with my play style of wanting to play something new. Well, if you do your rebalances now, it's a whole new format, right? I mean, uh, if you they have a lot of variables that they can change on these cards for alchemy.
Yeah.
And so if you buff particular cards or even just changing the cards that are in the spell books, or was it key to the archive,
Oh yeah.
you can make some substantial changes to the format that give people an opportunity to do some, actual deck building and metagaming to surprise this field. And now it's just going to be, these are the decks that we've had for the past 2 months. So just play the best one if you want to win. And that's not as fun.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I suppose it shouldn't surprise anyone that Wizards is doing the conservative thing, right? Whenever it concerns bans and format shakeups of any kind, they've tended to be very, very conservative. I think one of the few exceptions to that rule was actually the Pioneer format. And I feel like that was such a cool format for that reason. I really liked how it was very much a play at your own risk format. It was like day trading in Magic form, right?
Right. And, I think if they got aggressive with alchemy and they're doing the changes every week, then that takes a lot of the sting away from it when they do nerf a card. Because they're not doing the wild card reimbursements, right?
Yeah.
But if they show they're not afraid to nerf something, and then if they went too far to bring it back a little bit, that'd be great, And with changes coming every week, you can play around and play lots of different cards, try lots of different strategies. And if something gets nerfed, all right, you lose out on it now, but maybe it's viable again in a few weeks with one of these changes.
Yeah.
And I think people would get really into the format if they decide to manage it that way, which they haven't so far, but we can hope.
Yeah. I mean, in the very least, just kind of delivering on that promise of every month, right? I mean, that would be basically 2 days from now, or maybe even it would have been yesterday, right? Depending on how you track the timeline. And I mean, I think I agree with a lot of people who say that would have been a great time to shift up this format is, Thursday of this week, right? So, I mean, I totally agree. I hope that they will get a bit more aggressive with that and switch things up. And, we've definitely proven, I mean, isn't it wild to think that alchemy dropped just a month ago? I mean, it feels like a lifetime in terms of anyone who's been playing, standard and or alchemy formats like since then. I mean, it's funny, like I just on stream earlier this week went back to playing standard for the first time in a month. And it was, it was like a Seeker's Chariot came down and made 2 cats. And I had this moment of like, oh, right. Like I'm not in Kansas anymore. Or maybe I'm like back in Kansas, right? Like depending on how you put it. But it just made me realize like how far I had come just in that time since alchemy was dropped.
Yeah, it does feel like it's been around forever. But there was a lot of jokes when the format first launched about, oh, my opponent at F&M says the card doesn't do this anymore or whatever. But it does feel a little bit that way when you go into the standard queue for the first time and forever. And we're like, oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work the way it does in historic.
Well, so I wanted to ask you about that as well, because, you're a historic player. So how do you feel about the alchemy effect, the alchemical effect on the historic format?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's a weaker version than what standard has, that's probably not good for historic. I don't know if they should just only leave themselves the option of the paper printing for historic. It seems like it would be nice to be able to modify the cards there, but it just can't be the weaker standard versions, that they've changed for alchemy. Like Luminarch Aspirant, having to play the worst version in historic is kind of a joke, right? But some cards they could push further. Maybe something's not good enough for historic, and they want to improve it a little bit.
Well, I was thinking about that. I mean, like, for example, I remember when Kaladesh hit, and all of a sudden we saw these like mono brown artifact combo decks and stuff like that hit historic. Yeah. And like, how sweet would it be if they just like gave those decks a little nudge, right? Or, I mean, there's so many different archetypes which have been good in the history of historic. And I mean, it would be kind of sweet to just see if some of those could have some life again.
Yeah, when that Kaladesh set did come out, everyone was worried about Aetherworks Marble, right?
There you go.
Like, oh no! And then it's actually done stone nothing in that amount of time too. So maybe that's a deck that needs a little something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also, you can dial back decks that are a little too good in the format too, right? So I think ultimately what they need to do is probably just wind up with 3 versions, right? The original printing, an alchemy version, and a historic version.
Okay, there we go. Just got 3 different historic queues lined up for you.
Yeah.
That's not going to affect the queue times in any way, of course. But I mean, I agree. Like it is just it's a problem it's a hard problem to solve, like any way that you look at it, right? Exactly. And I think like I think what it highlights is that each format has its particular considerations that need to be made. And we see this in the paper Magic formats. You do kind of see a lot of that differentiation happening, right? So like, for example, Vintage basically has its own rule set with restricting cards. Right. I suppose Legacy and Modern are probably fairly the same in that they just have a ban list and that's kind of it. But, it is interesting how like each format over time is kind of showing, whether it's Wizards or even in the case of like the Commander Rules Committee, it's like showing the community and the governing body that each format kind of needs its own thing, right? Like it needs to be regulated in its own way.
Yeah, it really does, especially with Modern and Legacy being impacted by the direct-to-modern printings of Modern Horizons. Yep. And soon Lord of the Rings, right? And then you look at a format like Pioneer, and it's so pristine. Wow, it doesn't have these sets that have been injected directly into it. And I think that's a lot of the appeal of the format right now. There's a lot of different decks you can play. It's all organically made. It's just these are the sets that were in standard for the past X years. So hopefully they'll be adding Pioneer onto Arena at some point. And then maybe that can be the format where people can play all of these cards that are the actual printings, and not have any of the rebalancing done to them.
Yeah, I totally agree. That would be amazing. I did want to, just on that note, I do find it interesting, a criticism that a lot of people have leveled at Alchemy is that like, oh, why are you bringing this to Arena instead of just putting Pioneer on there, right? And I think it's legitimate that people feel that way. One of the things that kind of blows my mind, though, is just how many sets there actually are in Pioneer. I think maybe people don't quite realize like just how many cards that is.
It really is. I mean, Pioneer is about the same size as what Modern was when Modern came out. Mm-hmm. And so if you're talking 4 standard sets a year over the past 10 years or whatever it is. That's a lot of cards. Now, I do think that they could do some bundles of playable cards somehow.
Yep.
Maybe they need to do some best of Pioneer cards to add them into the client.
Totally.
To help working on the cards that actually get played, you know?
Yep.
Like, you don't have to worry about 90% of the cards from these sets because it's all draft cards, right?
Yeah.
Get in the ones that people want to play with and work towards that. And I think they will. But it takes some time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I think they were doing a great job of like releasing these remastered sets, you know, Kaladesh remastered, Amonkhet remastered. I thought that was a really good approach to getting towards it. You know, it gives people a chance to play those sets in limited again. You know, it gives the historic metagame a chance to kind of adjust to those sets, right? So I think that was a really good cadence. But of course, they can only make a few of those a year. And so if you do the math on that, it's going to take like a decade to really fill it out, right? So I agree. They're gonna have to accelerate it in some way if they want to get Pioneer on there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, talking about the remastered sets, those were great. People, by and large, loved being able to draft the old sets, and getting new cards for historic at the same time was a bonus. And the thing that gets slept on a little bit is having it available to draft was a great way to give card acquisition for historic too.
Yep.
And that's something that is missing with Alchemy as well. You can't draft the Alchemy only cards. And so it's either spend your wild cards or, you know, you're just not going to be able to play with the new cards.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit of a roadblock for the Alchemy format as well.
I totally agree. Yeah. Honestly, I felt a little bit ripped off when like I fired up Arena at the beginning of this season and I got my rewards and they were like Innistrad packs, right? Because I was like, man, I spent the entire freaking month playing Alchemy. Couldn't you just cough up like 5 or 6 Alchemy packs? Like hook a brother up, right?
Yeah. I do think that the monthly ladder rewards should be Alchemy packs. Just because they're not available otherwise. I mean, you have to spend your gold, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it gets rid of the feel bads of they set the monthly rewards and then it's the set that's been out the whole time. Like when Midnight Hunt came out, and then they're like, "Here's your D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms packs." Right?
Feels so bad.
Right. And if it had been like, well, here's the Alchemy versions that just came out, you know, 4 weeks ago or whatever, that would be a lot more acceptable, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like Wizards has kind of shot themselves in the foot by not being more generous with Alchemy. I mean, imagine how much more positive the community outlook would have been if they'd been like, welcome to Alchemy, here's 20 packs, right? Like, just make it rain a little bit, you know, like give people something to like be excited about, right? So even if they're still complaining about the economy, they have this massive feels good, you know, of like, I got this huge injection and now I'm actually motivated to build a deck because I got a decent number of cards.
They're able to jump into the format and play it and say, oh, wow, you know what, this is actually better than standard. Why would I want to play standard, right? Because I do think once people get into it, Alchemy is just going to be a better play experience because it's not going to be just a 2-deck format. But as it is now, with the cards being pretty hard to get for it, you know, like I have my mono red dragon stack that was cool the first week of the format, and I haven't made anything else because I'm not opening the cards for it. I don't have any wild cards. So
totally.
I think it causes some stagnation in what it could be.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, any drug dealer knows, right, that like the first dose is free. So I don't know. I don't know quite what they're missing there. You know, it's one of those things where it's not that easy in paper Magic to like really make it rain, right? Because they, you know, it's kind of that's a pretty steep cost. Whereas on a digital client, it costs them basically nothing to just give you some stuff. And
for paper, though, they do give you stuff. There's the little promo packs.
It's true.
That the store gets to distribute however they want, right? So they could just say, oh, hey, thanks for coming in. Here's a promo pack. And it's got a new rare in it. It's got a rare from a few months ago or a few sets ago. And then you get a good uncommon or common that sees play, like Consider or whatever. So they give people that hit for paper. So they just need to do it online too.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, it seems like a no-brainer. I actually feel like they're going to make more money that way. But what do I know? I'm just a pleb with a microphone.
Did you see that someone had posted the games played off of Untapped for each of the formats?
I saw it like in the first week of the format or something, but I haven't seen it lately.
I'd seen a post, it might have been a week ago now, just the number of games played for Standard, Alchemy, and Historic in Best of 1 and Best of 3. And it's really eye-popping, you know, to see the numbers. Now, it's just people that have the Untapped tracker installed, so it should be slanted a little bit towards more invested players and theoretically more competitive anyway. But it was Standard Best of 1 was by far the most played. But Alchemy was actually second.
Like above Historic, above any of the other.
Yeah, it was probably at least 50% more than Historic. And of course, Best of 1 was much preferred over Best of 3 overall.
Yep.
Which makes sense, you know, just people want to get a quick game in and not be anchored to their computer or on their phone for an hour for a turbo fog mirror or whatever it might be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that it's still, a very popular format, even if it hasn't immediately overtaken Standard. And I think that if they play their cards right, I think it could easily be the most played format on Arena.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. So definitely just looking forward to, hopefully they'll take the community feedback, be a little bit more aggressive with the format changes, hopefully be a little bit more generous with the rewards, and that could just really smooth over a lot. Okay. So Robert, there's another set of questions that I want to ask you, and it's just related to the fact that you probably see more deck lists than almost any other player alive, right? And so, feel free to share whatever pearls of wisdom you have kind of gleaned over the years. But I guess I just wanted to ask you, like, is there anything that stands out in your mind as being like, here's a pattern that I see that I think people should pay attention to, or maybe here's something that people could learn that maybe wouldn't have been apparent to them if they hadn't looked at thousands of deck lists?
Well, I will say I'm not necessarily looking super closely at all of these deck lists because I don't have that much time,
Yeah.
But I have played for quite a while, so I think that the main thing, like, people should try to play the most efficient cards for competitive play anyway. If you have the option to play more 1-drops and 2-drops, this goes for limited too. If you're choosing between 2 cards, take the cheaper one usually. Because it's just going to make your deck more consistent. And if your deck can do the thing it's supposed to do every game, you're going to win more. It won't matter that you've missed your 3rd land if your deck is mostly 1s and 2s. So that's a big thing that I look at, because I do draft a lot, but it plays across all formats, really. Um,
I just wanted to cut in. I thought such a stark example of that was that Golgari food deck, which, you know, was played at the latest championship. I mean, there's like, if I remember correctly, there's no card in the main deck that costs more than 2 mana. I mean,
right, it's a Luris deck.
yeah. I mean, it's like, I guess Meathook Massacre in theory can cost more, but I mean, it just blew me away at like how threatening and devastating that deck was with just ones and twos.
Yeah, I could have played it. I was qualified for that PTQ or qualifier weekend, and it was the deck that I had the best results with in the few weeks leading up to it. And just when I went to register, I'm like, the cards in this deck are all so bad that I just couldn't do it. And of course, the deck was great. I should have totally played it, but I didn't.
Yep. So there you go. So I feel like you're about to say something else there as well before I cut in with that.
Mainly, you know, if you do have your a deck that you're playing a lot, that's going to help out a lot too. The days of people breaking the format seem like they're kind of over for the most part. So if you have a deck that's good and you've practiced with it a lot, you know how to sideboard for all of your different matchups, that's going to help your win percentage a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you?
I'm sure, like, you could really read off all of your sideboard plans for your Simic decks that you like to play. You know exactly what you're doing when it goes to sideboarding after the first game. And it sure helps a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, and something that I have learned over my time of being a Magic player, and I'm by no means, I would say, like a top Magic player, but something that I really learned is just getting used to an archetype, or even getting used to a macro archetype, right? So like I would call like an archetype in the current format is like the Is It Turns archetype. But then there's a broader macro archetype, which is just like control, right? Or maybe like kind of a spells-based Is It decks that tend to kind of have a theme, right? And you'll see them continue to pop up in like limited formats, whether it'll be an Is It Spells deck or whatever. And so even if it's a new format with new cards and a new idea, if you're really used to playing like, okay, I really enjoy playing Is It Spells in draft, you already have a skill set. So it sounds like you're kind of getting at that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, you can look at some of the great pro players over history that they're like known for drafting white aggro decks, for example, or a standard player that always plays mono red, like Sandy Dog, right? That's just the deck that they know best, and it doesn't matter what format it is. Even they're going to play that deck, and they're going to do great with it because they have that experience.
Yep. It adds up, man. It really does. So I also just wanted to ask you, do you have preferences? Like, what are your either pet cards, pet archetypes, pet decks, or styles that you just keep coming back to over the years?
A lot of times I play ramp decks of some sort.
Ah, man after my own heart.
Yeah. But if they've got some weird stuff going on, that's even better, right? But I've played Maze's End when it was in standard. And that was kind of a weird deck because it had a lot of control elements to it, even though it was a land-based deck, right? But in the cube drafts, you know, I've been practicing a little bit for the decathlon finals, and I'll play the 5-color green decks that can splash anything and go over the top of everything. And it makes for a very interesting play experience that way, because you've got so many different types of spells in the deck that every game's a little bit different, right?
Nice.
All right, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Finally got another visitor.
Yeah, that was Soren. I don't think he made it on the camera, but he's been sleeping over in the chair for a while. So.
Nice. Planes walked in. Awesome. All right. Well, Robert, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, but I think it's time for us to planeswalk on out of here. So before we go, I just wanted to ask, first of all, I'm just going to tell everyone, go and follow Robert on Twitter at fireshoes. That's the very first thing you should do if you're not already doing that. Is there anywhere else that people can catch you, or any other kind of content that you make that people should know about?
Twitter's the main social media platform I use. I've got Facebook, but I'm not even on it every day, so it's not as good to get to. But if you do live in the Midwest U.S., stop by the Midwest Tournament Updater. You can check the pin post that has a schedule of upcoming events like the NRG series. Or here in Iowa, we've got OCM MTG, which I'll be judging their team event next weekend for. Should be fun. But yeah, mainly on Twitter. And if you check my profile, I do have a Patreon that people want to contribute, or a Ko-fi link. That's mainly it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, go show Robert some love. I mean, it's no exaggeration to say that I feel like you hold up an entire corner of the Magic universe, like pretty much single-handedly. Anyway, I have a great appreciation for what you do. And I know a lot of people really look forward to your retweets and your deck lists and all that kind of stuff. So you're rendering a huge service to the community.
Hey, thanks. It's a great way for people to stay involved in Magic, even if they're not actively playing all the time anymore. You can at least see what's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Robert, thanks so much for being on the show, and I'll look forward to rubbing elbows with you, hopefully in person at some point. And in the meantime, keep kicking ass, and I'll catch you later.
All right, thanks.